Okay, I hope everybody's having a good time, learning a little something maybe. I'm Ed Greeno. I'm the medical director at the Masonic Cancer Clinic, and I'm executive medical director for cancer care at University of Minnesota Health. I'm also a professor in the Department of Medicine and a medical oncologist who takes care of GI cancer patients, does clinical research. And I'd like to introduce you to our panel here. We have Judy Erdahl, who's a patient, an advocate, and a philanthropist, and she's the co-founder of Team Judy, a fund for metastatic breast cancer research. Thank you. Dr. Thomas Witzig, he's Deputy Director for Clinical Research and a professor in the Department of Medicine from the Mayo Clinic Cancer Center. Dr. Richard Peterson, a neuro-oncologist at Health Partners and a participating member of Metro Minnesota Community Oncology Research Consortium, MCORC, I think I spit that out right. Susan Wolf, a professor in the Department of Medicine and McKnight Presidential Professor of Law, Medicine, and Public Policy, and chair of the Consortium on Law and Values in Health, Environment, and the Life Sciences. And then Scott Nelson, a patient and a research advocate. So we've been hearing today about some great ideas on preventing cancer, some really exciting stuff about immunology and viral therapy for cancer, something that excites me, so that if my melanoma comes back, those great guys you heard up here are going to be able to take care of me. But the research breakthroughs we've heard about are only theoretical until it's proven that it's really effective in either the prevention or treatment of cancer. And we find that too few trials are opened. I was very jealous to hear Dr. Veneris say that the number of pediatric patients enrolled is close to 80%. More than 80%, that's great. For most cancers, it's more like 3%. And there's a lot of issues that arise with access to care. There's perception for many that is negative related to clinical trials, and there are unresolved tensions between things like medical privacy and the sharing of data. And so I'd like our panelists to speak their minds about some of these issues, and then we'll take some questions. So if we could go ahead.
Good afternoon. I am one of the reasons that solving the cancer issue is so complicated. I don't smoke, never did, exercised all the time, ate healthy, and always had screenings, but I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. On my 5-year appointment, we discovered that the cancer had metastasized, and I was now a stage 4 patient. So I am honored to be here today representing stage 4 cancer patients. I'm not so much an expert on participating in clinical trials as I am an expert on being excluded from participating in clinical trials. The majority of cancer deaths, over 580,000 annually, come from metastatic cancer. However, metastatic cancer or stage 4 cancer patients are vastly underrepresented in research, funding, and clinical trials. So here are my moonshot hopes. Firstly, patient-driven research. We need broad changes to improve clinical trial accruals and outcomes, and these changes should include better access to trials. This includes physical access as well as lowering pre-treatment exclusions, and it's exceptionally difficult for minorities and women of color to be included in trials. Release of preclinical data, which might help patients make better informed decisions on participating in trials. Sharing of timely trial results, whether positive or negative. Patients want to feel included and are invested in the outcome. Provide more access to trial drugs through compassionate care for stage 4 patients. Secondly, include patient-reported outcome assessments. The use of these assessments would provide meaningful information on how treatments are affecting the quality of a patient's life. It's important to consider the patient's perspective when creating and administrating these. Make them short, meaningful, and provide easy access for a patient to complete them. Thirdly, increase metastatic specific funding and research across all cancers. Establish a granting mechanism through NCI which focuses on multi-indication metastatic research. Ask NCI to create a metastatic oncology group similar to SWOG, which is a specialty group specializing in conducting clinical trials for adult cancers. Share the data. Require that government-funded grants share data. We can't do this in silos, and collaboration is key. And it's one of the reasons I am so proud to always support the Masonic Cancer Center. I'm so proud of the collaboration that you have here and the way that you help others. Add the date of metastatic diagnosis as part of the designated medical record set, whether original diagnosis, reoccurrence, or progression. This can be tied by executive action to insurance reimbursements so that doctors can be reminded to do it, and include the date of metastatic diagnosis in the meaningful use standards. This could also help lead to a national count that could feed down into SEER, but also into other novel registries. To summarize in the words of Monty Python, I'm not quite dead yet. I would like to be counted, and I would like to be included as a metastatic cancer patient. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Witzig.
So I'm going to show you a model, if you look up there, of what I think are the players in addressing some of the issues that Judy just talked about. So to have a really effective clinical trial system, I'm likening this to a chair, a three-legged chair with the patient sitting on the chair. The first leg that's really important is doctors like myself that see patients like Judy who know the issues in my respective specialty so that I can design the kind of trials that address the needs that she has just brought up. The second leg that's really important is to have a really good drug company or a device company that's innovative, that raises capital, that is willing to risk and do the kind of trials that need to address the issues, and are also willing to work with people like us so that we write the trials, as she said, to include the proper eligibility criteria so that people like her are indeed included. The third leg is the insurance company, and we've heard some little smatterings about that today, haven't we? Insurance companies and the government, they are people of interest in the clinical trial system. The government needs to address this by putting and doing the proper trials that perhaps the drug company won't do. So all three legs are important. If any of the legs break, the clinical trial system starts to fall apart. Now, the other thing that's different about this in medicine than if we were talking about selling hamburgers or cars is that medicine is different. It's unique. It's a profession. It's got both business and mission. It's got health disparities. We need to have a mission to those kind of people, right? So we have to put our business hat on sometimes, and we also have to put our missionary hat on so that we do it right. And each one of those legs have to have that balance of business and mission, because if you don't have any money, you don't have any mission either. And so the second thing that's unique is almost all of us are going to sit on that chair at some time. So we need to build a system so that when it's our turn to face cancer, that stool is quite stable and all three legs are working. And last of all, medicine is probably the only job that I know of where you work to try to work yourself out of a job. So that's what I'm hoping to do with the Moonshot. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Peterson?
Okay. So anyone who knows me knows that if I'm asked to talk about clinical trials for brain tumors, I can start getting very, very passionate very, very quickly. So I actually had to reel myself back in a little bit and remind myself, okay, so what exactly are we talking about here? We're talking about the Moonshot. So we're talking about this directive to try to improve the earlier detection, advance our research, and expand access and improve clinical trial access and care to patients, because at the end of the day, that's why we're here, is to make sure we're taking the best care of patients that we can. So I thought about this and said, well, what do I think about and hear on a daily basis? Well, I hear from patients and families about Moonshot and what does this mean? And then, you know, you're in clinic or you're talking with other researchers, and what does it mean to them, and what does it mean to me? So that's why I broke it down. So what do patients and families tell me? Well, they tell me that the process is very overwhelming to consider a clinical trial. Someone mentioned clinicaltrials.gov earlier, and yes, all the clinical trials are listed there, but to try to make sure that you're finding, the trials for newly diagnosed glioblastoma or recurrent glioblastoma is not always that easy. So they're all there, but sometimes trying to sort through them is not always as easy as it seems. What do all these different phases mean, and how does that apply to things? That people don't always understand that and get a little confused about what a phase 1, 2, and 3 study means. Also some frustration over how results of things are portrayed in the media, and that might get me in trouble sitting up here, I don't know, but you'll hear a news report, some new gene was found yesterday, okay? Well, you're led to believe that a cure for X, Y, or Z is right around the corner, but the truth is that discovery may not lead to anything for 10 or 15 years, all right? So there's some frustration that I hear on the part of patients and families from that respect. And then I'm always asked, well, what is the best trial for me? Well, the truth is that there's not necessarily a best one. That patient may be eligible for, 3 or 4 that are all very good studies, but there's not necessarily a best one. But there's still this perception that there's some better trial out there for me or for my loved one. So a lot of frustration. And then the other thing that I'm going to echo, which has already been said, is this need to try to connect our patients to better treatments, all right? So there's this goal of individualized, personalized medicine, and it's a lofty goal. But I think that is what we have to work towards. We can't, in my field, dealing with malignant brain tumors, I can't treat all of my patients with glioblastoma the same. They're not the same. The tumor is not the same. There are multiple variations. So we need to find a better way to do that. So what do we talk about at work and research in clinic? Issues of funding. So I'm here because I'm a representative of this NIH-funded organization, this Metro Minnesota Community Oncology Research Consortium, right? It's a mouthful. So it's NIH-funded, 20 centers here in the Twin Cities, even into western Wisconsin, and we enroll on average about 600 patients a year into clinical trials. But could we do more? We could if we had more funding to be able to hire more people to oversee and manage and help take care of these patients and manage the clinical trials. It takes money to do this. All the support staff, the nurses, the data collectors, you name it. The process of developing and actually getting a trial to the market, if you will, is a long, arduous process. Some people argue that it's not stringent enough. Some people argue that it's too stringent. What's the right answer? That is a topic of debate and interest and something that needs to be thought about moving forward. Dr. Witzig brought up the idea of funding for clinical trials. So more and more we're seeing, for example, that pharma and industry is sponsoring large-scale clinical trials, even more so than the NIH is. Is this good? Is it bad? I'm not sure, but I'm not sure anyone's really paying attention to this and really trying to look at who's doing what trial. How many different trials do we need in X condition looking at PD-1 inhibitors? I'm not sure. But I think someone needs to be looking at making sure that all the money, whether it's coming from pharma or Moonshot or wherever, is actually getting to where it needs to get to, and that we're not overly duplicating our efforts. Medications, who owns the medicine, who's distributing it, who's overseeing this, right? You start having all these competing interests. At the end of the day, who pays for all of this? Who pays for one of us to see the patient, for our time in that? Who pays for the drug? Who pays for all the tests? Who pays for the research staff? My perspective in all of this, right, I'm a brain tumor doctor. So I see people who have incurable brain cancer on a daily basis. I want better treatments, and I want to be able to have access to those, to be able to offer them to my patients. Just because I'm at a community center, right, just because I'm at Regions doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about, right? So we have 10 clinical trials for brain tumors. You don't have to go, I guess what I'm trying to say here is you don't have to go to the Mayo, no respect, right? No disrespect, right? You don't have to go to the U. When we talk about the Moonshot and access to care and clinical trials, that it can't just be the large academic centers, right? That it has to be, all of the other really high quality community centers as well. Yes, there needs to be greater collaboration. People can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. We need to make sure that people are getting to the right care, the best care. I don't care about silos, okay? If I have a brain tumor patient and I don't have a clinical trial for them, then I will help them find one, right? So that's the way it has to be done. All right, I'll finish. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Susan?
Let me give you my punchline first. You've heard about fantastic science and care innovation. It's going to take tremendous innovation in ethics, law, and policy to get us there. You heard some of that from Judy already. So let me tell you what I mean by making that claim. First of all, how many of you are involved in some way in patient advocacy? If you just raise your hand. A lot. Yeah, a lot of folks here. You are the front lines. You are indispensable to making change happen that will allow progress in science and medicine. So what do I mean by all this? Let me explain by connecting the dots between two big federal efforts, the Moonshot, of course, but also the Precision Medicine Initiative. As you all know, in January of 2015, President Obama announced the Precision Medicine Initiative, an enormous project to prospectively enroll over 1 million Americans, volunteers, who would consent to share a lot. Their data, their electronic health records, there would be genomic analyses, other omic analyses, diet and other lifestyle information, all the way to environmental exposures. And a diverse population, crucial. Why do you need so many people? Why is diversity important? You need so many people because you need the statistical power in order to figure out the rare events, the rare genomic constitution that leads to a certain phenotypic expression, be it cancer or some other illness. You need the diversity because sadly, we've learned that our genomic and genetic data sets are not representative of the populations in the United States. They are currently overwhelmingly white, and they are overwhelmingly people who already have access to the advanced academic and other health centers. That's not representative of who we are as a people. So that's the reason for the scale, and that's the reason for the upfront commitment to essential diversity. So since the president first announced this, a lot has happened, and I hope you're subscribing, as I have, to the alerts. You can go to the NIH website for the PMI, or you can go to the White House website for the PMI, and they'll ping you in your inbox whenever something new happens, though there's a lot going on behind the scene. So this thing is launching now, but a very, very important document was a working group, a planning group, was convened, and last September they issued a report that's right up there in full text on the NIH PMI website saying, how are we going to do this? And it's a long document, and it's almost all about ethics, law, policy. And the guts of it is saying the only way to do this on this scale with this many Americans, collecting this much information, is in partnership with them, and with them largely in the lead. This is something Judy already forecasted. These are the people living with risk. These are the people living with illness. They often know symptoms better than anybody else. They know exposures better than anyone else. If you want to tap people's generosity, which is what you've got to do, for them to open all of this data and share all of this data and incur the non-zero privacy risk. Let's be serious. Non-zero privacy risk. You've got to do it with them, in partnership with them. This is a different model of how to do science. This is not the conventional model of how to do it. And that is why every time you see one of these PMI events, who's in the front row? It's the patient advocacy organizations. Because many of them are already initiating this. And there are outfits all around the country, Sage Bionetworks, Genetic Alliance. Some of you know this list better than I know this list, who are tremendous innovators in how do you structure and do clinical trials, how do you do discovery in this space. So precision medicine is going to be crucial to the Moonshot. The little graphic I've got on the right is from the PMI website, and it's all about cancer. Cancer is in the lead in the PMI, and that's another reason why they're joined kind of at the hip, if you will. You need partnership with participants because we've got to build data commons. Somebody else mentioned the importance of sharing data, absolutely crucial. Deep data, data that is not fully de-identified. If you want to follow people prospectively, okay, they've got this genotype. Now this tumor manifests, you've got a phenotype. Now you've got this treatment intervention. What happened? Did it work? Maybe it worked for a while. Now they're back. What's going on with the tumor genome? While we've got the germline genome, you've got to maintain identification of records sufficient to follow all that longitudinally. So you can't fully de-identify in all of these models. So we need data commons, and we need biorepositories. We need blood, we need tumor specimen, we need a lot in order to really do this. You need robust access to data. A core commitment of the PMI is that every single of those million-plus participants has complete access to their own data. Doing that requires very fancy informatics and security controls and very robust consent from these people in order to have that much access. There's a further commitment, though, that's even more startling, which is full access, if they want it, to their interpreted results, and full access, if they want it, to the cohort aggregate results. What did you find? And not just that they have to learn how to, look in PubMed or the New England Journal of Medicine or whatever it is, presented to them, ideally with patient-facing interfaces on their computers, on their smartphones, however it's best for them to get it. How do you do this? You need huge innovation in the ethics and the law and the policy on consent, on oversight, on privacy, on access to all this information and specimen, and on data quality. So the Food and Drug Administration is already deep into it, NIH is deep into it, and patient advocacy organizations are deep into it. Let me give you a quickie example, which is there's a huge brouhaha in England right now. Not only the Brexit, that's not the only brouhaha going on, because the National Health Service gave Google access to the identified data of about 1.6 million people. Was that embraced in the broad consent these people gave? Did they expect that Google would get all of their sensitive medical information? Debate. Maybe not. But as we partner, as we must, with the most sophisticated technical partners, you see how that drives us back to what kind of consent should we get? What do people need to know? Do they need to have the option to say, no, I don't want Google or Amazon or whoever it is to have all of that? That's just a tiny, tiny taste of the scope of the problems here. So there are a lot of projects right now building some of these pathways in ethics, law, and policy. I put the little logo for LawSeek. That's a brand new project that we have here at the University of Minnesota, jointly with Vanderbilt. I'm one of the 3 PIs on that project, and it's essentially to wrestle the law of genomics to the ground, because the law of genomics is a mess, and it's not well understood, and it's a barrier right now to progress. There are other very important projects going on, like the Clinical Sequencing Exploratory Research Consortium, the eMERGE network, all over the country to try and break through these barriers, not just on the science and the care, as important as that is, but on how we do this in a way that's genuinely responsive to the needs, the interests, and the desires of the people who are facing illness. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to talk about clinical trials from a patient's perspective, and there's, first just a touch of background. There's 3 reasons that this is an important topic for me. A clinical trial saved my life 12 years ago. The initial diagnosis and then the initial path of treatment was something that we ended up changing. Went into a clinical trial headed by my friend over here, Dr. Greeno, and that clinical trial saved my life. Now, since that time, I've worked with a lot of patients and research advocates as well. We've set up support groups for cancer patients and their caregivers here in the Twin Cities, and I work with the National Survivors Network, so I talk to a lot of newly diagnosed patients, and this is a very important topic to them. I'm also a local cancer research advocate and also on a national funding committee that makes those decisions as well, so I get to see the other side of the clinical trial from the funding and the choices as to which clinical trials should be funded. So today I'm primarily going to talk about the patient perspective on clinical trials and what we can do to make clinical trials more effective. First part of this would be the initial cancer diagnosis. I live in the pancreatic cancer world where 75% of the patients are diagnosed, it's already spread and it's inoperable. So in that situation, the people I'm working with primarily it's an initial cancer diagnosis. And your first reaction, as some of you know, is shock, confusion, fear, and temporary deafness. It's like you get hit by a truck, basically. Then you regain your composure, you search for information, and then you search for guidance. I mean, you're looking for information you need to regain some control over your life and get back on the path. You search the internet, you talk to friends and family, you look to your care provider, and you expect your care provider to tell you what you'll need to know, what to expect, what to do, to provide help for you to navigate through this and to give you the information you need when you need it, including treatment options, which also include clinical trials. 2016 survey by Cancer Care of 3,000 patients showed that regardless of where they were treated, only 12 to 18% of the respondents felt adequately informed about clinical trial opportunities. There's also a disconnect on where patients expect to get the clinical trial information and where they're actually getting it from. Another study showed that many patients want clinical trial information from their primary physician or specialist, but actually get it from the internet, and then 46% then from their primary physician or specialist at 20%. Also a disconnect between what oncologists believe about why patients didn't enroll in clinical trials and why they weren't actually enrolling. Another study, on the oncologists that were surveyed, they thought that the reason for patients not enrolling was primarily fear of receiving placebos at 67%, fear of side effects, and inconvenient study locations. And when they surveyed the actual cancer patients, it was lack of awareness at 65%, while a fear of side effects, receiving placebo, and inconvenient locations each were less than 15%. So there's significant disconnect there. Actual barriers include lack of awareness, I don't think I qualify, fear, inconvenience, the clinical trial that I want is in another part of the country, and insurance confusion. Information needed by patients includes potential risks and benefits, purpose of the trial, physical location, will my confidentiality be protected, what's the length of participation, what's the impact to my quality of life as I go through this clinical trial. Participation influencers include, will this treatment help me, will it cure me, did my doctor recommend it, do I know what the risks are involved, and if I knew the risks, if I thought it would help someone else is also a significant factor. Participation drivers include helping advance science and treatment of my disease, helping others, and getting better treatment for my own disease. Talking about individual medicine, as Susan talked about, it's important to change the perception of clinical trials. Patient perception of clinical trials is, I've tried everything else and this is all I have left, is this one last shot. And reality is with individualized medicine, we need to reposition that, so this is one of your treatment options. Here's the specifics of your disease, the specifics of your makeup. Here are all of your options, including clinical trials, that make those more of a common part of the discussion that you have with your doctors and your physicians. So the recommendations I have that I think we need to do as it relates to clinical trials and patient participation. Education and training of primary care physicians and specialists on clinical trials and patient information needs and how to communicate this information to patients better. Improving care provider websites to provide better patient information, including about clinical trials. I do a lot of work on care provider websites, looking at ways to make that easier for patients, again, so that they can navigate their way through that. Better links between the care provider websites and the national clinical trial information websites. Those are not always easy places to get information. A national local communication campaign about clinical trials, about why they're important, how to get information. Again, tying it to individualized medicine, I think, would be important as well. And then improving the clinical trial paperwork. I've looked at clinical trial paperwork, and in one instance it said in bold letters, "This will not cure you." Well, a lot of people are not going to sign up if you say in bold letters, "This is not going to cure you," because there is always hope. So how can we make the clinical trial paperwork better so that the patients not only understand it better, but it also encourages them to sign up. And then on the flip side of that, as far as the clinical trial proposal documents themselves, I think those need to be better designed as well, because research advocates like myself, for example, have difficulty in telling what is the impact to the patient of this clinical trial. What's their quality of life going to happen for the pre-testing and during testing as well, and how is this going to actually affect them, and how can we use that information or not to encourage clinical trial participation. And then just the last thing would be to use our clinical trial participants in the most effective way. There was a national study by the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, the organization I do some work with, that looked at clinical trials over the last 25 years. And the goal was to figure out why has the pancreatic cancer survival rate stayed so low despite all of these clinical trials. And they looked at 25 years of clinical trial information. During that time, there were 32 phase 3 studies where only the total was 3 agents or combination agents actually turned out to be considered meaningful. In a significant number of those clinical trials, the phase 2 and phase 3 trials, in the phase 2 trials, they were advanced even though the indicators were that they were not going to be that helpful for the patients. I think the idea is, which is documented, the over-optimism of oncologists and pharmaceutical sponsors regarding results of phase 2 trials. And the point to that is that included 11,000 patients, clinical trial participants who could have been used in a better clinical trial. And we have a limited number of clinical trial participants. Let's use them in the best way on identifying clinical trials that really will be effective and can be effective, and focus them in that direction. So,
great. Thank you, Scott. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take some questions like we have for the other panels. If people want to come up to the microphones, I'd be happy to entertain some questions. Please tell us your name before you ask your question. And if you can know how to send us questions on Twitter, that'll be fine too. So let's start right here.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Steve Rockline. I'm a prostate cancer, been living with it for 15 years, and I run 2 support groups in Minneapolis, and I'm president of the Minnesota Prostate Cancer Coalition. So I'm here as an advocate. Okay, I've gotten hip on the PMI about the last couple of months, hearing a lot more about the Moonshot. So kind of Susan and Scott. By the way, Susan, I think you belong on radio with that voice of yours. I could have sworn I was listening to NPR when you were talking. Anyway, this mythical 1 million people sample. Who are these people? Are they already recruited? What's the status? And given all the limitations Scott and you talk about, where are we at with these 1 million people and all that data? And how do you get into that group?
There are 2 ways to get into that group: direct volunteer or through a health provider organization. The reason it might seem mythical right now, Steve, is that NIH is giving out the money right now to get this all going. They gave out a grant to Vanderbilt for a pilot project to figure out how to engage patient participants. But the big money is coming now. So they've got to fund the coordinating center for this whole thing. They have funded the biobank at Mayo. It's the setup time. I think, my view is that the hope is that actual enrollment will begin well before November. There's a reason I'm saying November. because the hope is to, I think, get this thing up, succeeding, moving, so that you can volunteer, I can volunteer, and it's really in place before we have a change of administration.
And I guess I would just add that actually my family and I joined the Mayo Biobank about 10 years ago, and that's been in place. And there's a significant number of people involved in that as well. In some of our research advocacy work, we've surveyed that group to try to get some information, and in some cases debate with Susan as to whether information should be shared that's found later, et cetera. But the point is that there are biobanks in place now, and there is some participation. They're going to get ramped up significantly, it sounds like, based upon what's happening.
Great.
Hi there. My name's Kevin Dillon, and my comment or question is one of the key stakeholders in this whole process is the FDA. And they're not here today, and we really haven't heard much mention from them. So I'd just like to know from some of the clinicians, are they on board with the Moonshot? Are they going to make things less burdensome? Are they going to move the goal line for patient safety? Because in order for this to be successful and faster and cram 10 years into 5, they're going to have to play a role, I would think.
So probably none of us have any personal insight into this. If you want to go ahead and answer, Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, the FDA is very involved. Well, the FDA is very involved in the PMI. They started a few years ago a whole personalized medicine section that has been run by Elizabeth Mansfield. And part of the goal there, although this is broader, is to think about how are they going to regulate genomic technologies. This is really a big part of what you need for the cancer moonshot and what you need for the PMI too. And if you just think about it, if your model is drug by drug or device by device, what are you going to do when you're staring at 3 billion base pairs in the human genome? So that's, problem number one. I was just on an NIH webinar about 2 weeks ago because the Food and Drug Administration has been struggling with the question, sorry, I'll be a little arcane for a second, when do you need an IDE, when do you need an investigational device exemption to do research that involves genomic analysis? Believe it or not, the whole pathway from, okay, we've got your blood, now we're going to analyze it, that involves some machines, it involves some software, it involves human interpretation, all the way to we've got data and then results, is considered a device by the Food and Drug Administration. So already you see they've been actually working really hard to figure out how their way of regulating fits onto this brave new world. They were front and center at this IDE webinar, so yes, they're very involved.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sandra Rope. I'm with a company that develops health IT for data sharing, so very interested in this panel. And I want to thank Susan particularly for bringing a nuanced view of data sharing, because I think that's so important to balance privacy and all the benefits of data sharing. But my comment is, I was at the Minnesota Health Law Institute presentations a couple weeks ago, and I was really surprised at the presentations to the lawyers about how dangerous it is to share data, and warning the lawyers advising providers that they should be very careful and share only when you absolutely have to and in the minimum because of worry of breaches. And I'm wondering if there's ways of bringing this message to the legal community so they can also have a more nuanced view of how data sharing needs to happen to make all this work.
Well, thanks for that important question. That's part of the ambition of this project that I mentioned, LawSeek, to wrestle with data sharing, access, balancing, privacy. But attorneys who already deal with academic health centers, for example, that get NIH funds, if you get NIH funds, there are requirements for data sharing. So they've already had to find a pathway that is protective of privacy and confidentiality and yet meets those obligations for data sharing. You can't take federal money and generate all this genomic information and sit on it. And there are efforts to incentivize, even outside the federal money, carrots and sticks. How do you get others to pool data? Because we have to have that to make progress. But there is another concept that's been emerging, and I think George Church's folks at Harvard have been key in this with the Personal Genome Project, which is the notion of data altruists, that we assume that everybody wants a total lockdown on their information. A lot of us do. Or we might discriminate. Some forms of our information they're okay to share. Other forms, maybe mental health, maybe substance abuse, I don't know. We're more wary of sharing. But this really varies, actually. I mean, there are empirical studies of this, and there are folks among us who care so passionately about contributing to progress that they say, sure, put my whole genome up on the web. That's the sort of design of a part of George Church's project. So one of the conversations has been, how do we avoid constantly defaulting to maximum lockdown and incentivize, actually, sharing and altruism and contributing, as Scott was talking about?
So my name's Luke Erdahl. Judy Erdahl's my mom. First of all, I just want to say how proud of her I am for her advocacy and involvement. Secondly, I'm a medical student, and in my first year of medical school, and kind of a rotation I've had, it seems like medicine's becoming much more of a team effort between the patient advocating more for themselves and communicating with their physicians. And do you feel like your physician always has you with the best treatment and the best clinical trial, or do you think that we could benefit from educating patients to be looking out for themselves and getting them into something more advantageous, or if it's too complicated to have patients looking for their own clinical trials?
Okay, so who would like to take that?
Judy, do you want to take the first swipe?
Sure. So
Oh, really?
I can tell you, for me, when I'm with patients, I want them to understand as much as possible about what they're doing. And I love when patients come prepared, having read about this. It can be frustrating that much of what they've come prepared with I need to undo, because there's so much out there that's wrong or presented in a way that's not really meaningful for the particular patient that's in front of you. But I think absolutely the more the patients are engaged in understanding what they're doing, why we're making the choices we are and what the choices are, the better I'm going to be able to take good care of them. So I think several people here probably have some comments on that as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you know my opinion on that already, which is basically yes. I mean, the patient needs to be an advocate for themselves. As I mentioned before, if I'd have stuck with the initial treatment path presented by my first physician, I wouldn't be here, right? So you've got to do the research, but the problem is I know nothing about medical information, and plus you just got this shock. So being able to work with and find sources of information really, again, depend upon your care provider or advocacy groups or national groups to be able to find the path is really critical, and it's not something that's done well today.
I think your question is absolutely crucial, and I'm completely heartened that you're in medical training and asking a question so vital. This balance between patient advocacy and autonomy and carving their own path and taking charge, and their need simultaneously for the expertise and the wisdom and the support and the partnership of their physician and other clinicians. That can be a very challenging balance to strike. And I would like to raise what may be sort of a controversial footnote here. I think it's more than a footnote. We know we need more patients in clinical trials. I loved your point, Scott, about really optimally deploying them in clinical trials. And at the same time, we have to be very wary of pushing them. Because there are patients, I think of my own mother when she was dying of lung cancer, who called me and said that her superb oncologist had just offered her enrollment in an antifungal clinical trial for her lung cancer, a stage 1 trial, and she was really calling me for permission to say no. And I gave her permission to say no. And she then moved into my sister's home with hospice for her dying process. It can be okay to say no. So it's a very tricky balancing act, but crucial.
I I think that's one very, very, very important point. With my physician, we are a team, and the average life expectancy for metastatic breast cancer is 33 months. I've survived 5 years, so I am an exceptional responder. But we are continuously balancing together my quality of life with my quantity of life. And I have developed a relationship with him that I trust him that when the time comes, we will make the decision when I will no longer continue treatment. Because for me, I do value the quality along with the quantity. I want to be here as long as I can. I want to see that kid walk across the stage, and I want to see him seeing patients. But it is about physicians, and it was mentioned earlier today, about physicians learning how to listen to patients and also trust their patients' instincts. And yes, sometimes patients come in with crazy things, because you would not believe the emails and texts I get telling me that if I dance naked under a full moon, eat asparagus in my left hand, and twirl and drink baking soda and vinegar in the other, that I will be healed. And I get it from everywhere. So sometimes I have to walk in and go, well, I don't know, 25 people have told me this. What do you think? I mean, it's a constant balance, and I think it's so important for patients and physicians to have a relationship that you are a team. I don't expect my doctor to be perfect and to make all of the decisions on his own. We have skin in it together, and that's how you move forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, the word nuance has been brought up, and I think that you have to really pay attention to that. You have to know your patient, and you have to know, where they're coming from, what they want, what do they want out of their treatment, and you really have to make those decisions together. It's not, you can't approach every patient the same. You have to understand that. You have to understand which patients are going to be more open-minded to things, which ones aren't. And you just have to be in tune with that. So good for you for asking these questions, and keep that awareness, because that will serve you well in the future.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So ask away, and then we'll move on.
I'm Patty Shrake. I'm with the Metro Minnesota Community Oncology Research Consortium, so with Dr. Peterson's group, and that's a whole ton of patients and clinics and doctors that have access to clinical studies in their own community. I wanted to comment on Susan Wolf's term robust consent and Scott Nelson's research paperwork dichotomy. My average consent to put a patient on an oncology clinical trial is 25 pages long. So even if you want to go on a study, you have to sit down and go through this book with me where I tell you page after page after page of every possible risk that will happen to you, including you could die on the study, and that it will not. I cannot guarantee you that it's going to help you. And we wonder why only 4% of adult cancer patients go on clinical trials. I was recently at the National Network, the NCCN National Cancer Network conference, and their response to that was, we need a one-page consent, maybe two, that says, this is the study, this is why we're studying it, this is how it's going to work, are you willing to participate? And here's more information if you want to look through it, if you want to discuss it with your doctor. But it's overwhelming to get people on study and have a robust consent, because I've also been involved in litigation. Someone on a consent takes the doctor to court because, this didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. So, we have legal advices and IRBs that tell us what we have to put in this consent. It's out of our hands. Any comments? Thank you.
25 pages is the opposite of robust consent. That's not what robust consent looks like. There's actually wonderful work going on to use all sorts of modalities to communicate to people, okay, what's the ballgame here? What are you signing up for? You know, videos, interactive computer stuff. I mean, to just rely on paper and a human being in the room is the old-fashioned way of doing this, and we have lots of data showing that doesn't work anyway. So we need to be moving that forward and figuring out what does work, and there really is a lot of innovation going on in this space. So I actually think we're probably on the same wavelength, Scott and I.
I think so. Yeah, we are.
Great. All right, I want to thank our panelists for all your time this afternoon. And if you guys want to go ahead and take a seat.